So this is my guide to Colm Toibin's style in Brooklyn. So basically what I've done is I've read a couple of academic articles on Brooklyn, I've read a whole bunch of book reviews by respectable people, and also a couple of good read reviews, so both those that were really good and those that were really bad. And I wasn't reading for what people thought, because obviously we're studying it regardless, but I was looking more for what that actually referred to about the writing and the style of writing that he's used. So again, in an essay you'll not only be talking about what happened in the book, the motifs, the symbols, but this is literary techniques we're talking about now. This is authorial intent and authorial style. So your learning intention is to become aware of the stylistic features of the text. So how is it written differently to, say, Macbeth, which we've already studied? Obviously in form it's prose rather than Shakespearean play, and obviously there's the rhyming pattern and so on in Shakespeare, which is not present here, but as we're not writing a comparative essay, you'll just need to know the stylistic features of this text. The success criteria for you is you will have understood the stylistic features and located examples. So you'll need a quote or a short section for each one. And unlike finding quotes for annotation, these can be quite long sections if you want, but obviously the only thing is you have to write it, copy it, or type it. Or perhaps even just take a picture if you want to get really high tech, and you can copy it into the OneNote if you want to show off. So your task is basically rule up 2 columns in your book. On the left hand side, write down whatever comes up on the video, and obviously listen so you understand what I mean. And on the right hand column of your little book there, what you need to do is find an example. So unlike annotation, you're not looking for short, simple quotes. You're probably looking for more of a passage or a section of the text. So you can either write this out, you can type it, or you could just take a picture of it and post it onto your OneNote if you want to show off a little bit. Alright, so stylistic feature number 1 is there are very few metaphors used in the text. So as I was reading it and rereading it and reading critical articles about it, I think I found perhaps 2 only. So a metaphor is where you compare X, you say X is Y. And it's not very common in spoken speech, but obviously it's something authors do to show off. And the fact that he's taking it out is significant. There are some similes, a lot more similes than there are metaphors, which are simpler and more common in conversation. But the fact that he's removed metaphors is very indicative of the way that he's taken himself out of the novel as much as possible. He's not showing off very often or at many points at all, and removing metaphors or not including them is something that definitely shows this pattern. Stylistic feature 2 is journalistic and simple writing. So it's third person, of course, but he's not adding his thoughts, he's not adding his opinions, he's not adding historical references beyond a couple of simple throwaway ones, and he's not really analysing it. He's the journalist, he's taking pictures, he's writing down notes of what's happening, what she's thinking, but that's all. Stylistic feature 3 is some use of idiomatic Irish expression. So every now and then, and it's not very often, there'll be some to be sure type writing. So we'll use apostrophes to show which sounds weren't pronounced and so on. And this is again mostly in Enniscorthy, but this is going to be a little bit tricky for you to find, so you might want to start in part 1 of the book. You're looking for someone who uses an Irish pattern of speaking. Alright, stylistic feature 4 is really easy. Obviously it's just written from a third person perspective, so it's not I did this, it is Eilis did this, she walked to the shop, she thought this, she felt this, she considered this. Stylistic feature 5, third person narrator is limited to only things that Eilis knows or observes. So there's no breaking down the fourth wall in terms of describing it as a play. He never suggests anything that she doesn't know, he never explains beyond what she understands, and he never goes back to things that she hasn't considered. So quite often something quite what we would consider quite dramatic or traumatic would happen to Eilis, and then it would be never referred to again, basically because she's moved on with her life, she's too busy, and she hasn't gone back. Whereas as a reader or as an author, it would be very easy to go back and say this, what she thought about this, later impacted event number 2. Stylistic feature 6, there's frequent use of conditional clauses. So this is words like might, should, could, would. Conditional means that it perhaps may happen in the future. So there's a lot of Eilis thought perhaps if she got married, she would like to have kids. So this was mostly at the start of sentences. So you're looking for something like Eilis considered, thought, not thought, thought that maybe perhaps. So something where it's very unsure whether she'll do it or not. Stylistic feature 7, obviously it's written in the past tense. So that should be pretty easy for you to find. Number 8, complex multi-clausal sentences. And this is, again, most often at the start of the sentence, as her thoughts and his writing tends to sort of fall rather than flow neatly. So it might be Eilis thought, considered, then suddenly decided that what she should do is quit her job and da-da-da. Stylistic feature 9 is it's told in a detached. Stylistic feature 9 is it's told in a detached, omniscient, all-seeing voice derived from Henry James's third-person intimate narrator. So omniscient means it's all-seeing. Detached means it doesn't really see into her thoughts. It will just describe that she is thinking of something. And it's also Henry James, which is a well-known author that he idolises, the author does. And it's what he would have called a third-person intimate narrator. So it's third person, it's removed from them. It's still a narrator telling the story, but it's intimate in that it knows some things about her, and it can perhaps know what she's thinking at times. Stylistic feature 10, and I need to read this because this is directly from an academic level essay. So he has fastidious syntax and repetition of reporting clauses, such as she saw, she felt, she thought, which means we focus on Eilis's responses to events, not her actions. And that's from Liam McIlverney from the London Review of Books. So fastidious syntax means that he's very controlled, he's very careful about the syntax he uses, and you'll see that almost, I'm going to say probably 40% of the sentences within the book start with either she saw, she felt, she thought. Regardless of what follows, it will almost always start with she. Number 11, sentences typically begin with false starts and superfluous clauses. So this is something I alluded to earlier. Superfluous clauses just means a couple of words in a comma, and that they're not essential. So if you were an author and you wanted to make the perfect sentence, you wouldn't start Eilis thought, mumbled, considered, decided, looked to the left, looked to the right. You would want it neat and concise, you'd want it clear. But he doesn't do that, and so we call that false starts to the sentence. Number 12 is more of a broader one, but he avoids at all turns chances to show off his skill as an author. There's no description of Brooklyn skyline, Coney Island, Ebbets Field, and so on. So these three examples were, people were quite disappointed with that, so they would have thought that she would arrive in Brooklyn and the first thing she would do is look up at the skyline, and there would be a florid description of the Brooklyn skyline with the buildings that were bigger than, touching the heavens, blah blah blah, and the lights, there weren't that many lights in Enniscorthy, but here it was lit up like, and that would be a perfect example for him to do some descriptive writing, throwing some metaphors, throwing some similes, really show off. He doesn't do that. It's almost brushed over quickly. Brooklyn was a bit bigger, the end. Coney Island is quite a beautiful place. They have a circus there, and it's often featured in films and so on. So again, people would presume that if you were writing about Coney Island, you would describe it. Coney Island in the 1950s was blah 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 blah. Ebbets Field is where they go to watch the baseball game. And again, probably if you're an American, you'd really go to town on how good baseball is and how beautiful the field is and so on. But he elects not to do that. Alright, so again, remember your task was to note down each of these things and find an example. Some will be harder than others, and I've described or suggested where you might find some of them if you get stuck. But give it a go, and then we'll discuss it in class.